This is one of the things I always try to do is to help people imagine themselves in that place and time, and to kind of hear and see what's going on, to think about it, to try to experience it as much as we can in this environment, in a basement in Monument, Colorado. It'd be much easier to teach this course if we were in Israel right now, but I think that helps to kind of draw out some of those questions that might arise. And sign up to bring soup, so we have that. So we're going to start with the video, and we will chat after the video.
It's a crucifixion. It's Rome's way of saying to people in the provinces, we rule you. If you want a ruler, that won't happen. Crucifixion is a form of public advertising, showing the power and the brutality of the empire. But crucifixion is also the death of friends, of family. People would gather at crosses. They were permitted to be there. But they also realized that were they to stand close, the soldiers would notice them, and their lives then may be put in danger. So we come to the cross as family, as friends, as witnesses, and we testify to what we've seen. The Gospels preserve for us memories, and they preserve stories. The evangelists, the gospel writers, may not have been eyewitnesses, but they heard from eyewitnesses. Each evangelist, Mark, Matthew, Luke, John, tells us the story as they intended their readers to understand it. Each has a different frame of reference. Each refers to different passages from the scriptures of Israel. Each sets different people at the cross, as if to say each is an invitation. Step into the story in different roles and witness for yourselves. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus tells his followers, if somebody compels you to go 1 mile, go with him the extra. Jesus was referring to the Roman practice of conscripting locals to carry gear, to carry bags, and sometimes to carry the crossbeam from the place of judgment to the place of execution. So in the Gospels of Mark, Matthew, and Luke, a fellow named Simon from Cyrene in North Africa, just coming in from the fields, is conscripted by the Roman soldiers, and upon him they laid that crossbeam. So Simon of Cyrene literally carries Jesus' cross. And he reminds us of Jesus' statement about picking up your own cross. What does it mean to be taken from the crowd and suddenly not only to become an eyewitness, but to become a participant? Mark tells us that Simon of Cyrene's children, 2 sons, Alexander and Rufus, are known to the community. But Simon of Cyrene does not show up in the Gospel of John. To the contrary. In John's Gospel, Jesus carries his own cross, because in John's Gospel, Jesus is never a victim. Jesus can do everything. Jesus orchestrates his own death. There's been a lot of work on bystanders. Bystanders during a war, bystanders when Romans conscript others and you're watching, bystanders when we see bullying happen in a school and people turn away rather than help. I'm not sure there are any innocent bystanders. If you see something that's violent, if you see something unjust, something wrong, aren't we called to speak out? And if we can't speak out, then we have to bear witness, particularly for those who cannot speak for themselves. There are no innocent bystanders, but what the bystander chooses to do will vary depending upon the individual witness and the individual crime or violence that's occurring. In Matthew, Mark, and Luke, there are chief priests and elders and scribes, and they're at the cross. And that always struck me as very weird, because the crucifixion is a place of death. And during the holiday of Passover, when priests may in fact be in the temple, the last place they want to be is a place of death, because death creates impurity. It's not that people could not touch a corpse. If they could not, then the story of Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea taking Jesus down from the cross would make no sense. But priests are in a special category. Priests should not be at the site of a cross, and that may be why they don't show up in the Gospel of John. On the other hand, John sets at the cross the mother of Jesus, the beloved disciple, and other women close by to Jesus. Maybe John has eliminated those chief priests in order to keep the focus on Jesus' new family that he creates, a mother and a new son. A lot of our English terms come from Greek, one of which is the word blaspheme. Blasphemo in Greek means to deride, to insult, and it can also mean to blaspheme. And now we have a problem, because it's not clear what actually counts as a blasphemy, and different religions have different definitions or different examples. When Jesus is hailed as Son of God, or even when he admits that he is the Son of God, that's not a blasphemy. We're all children of God. When Jesus allows himself to be called Christ or Messiah, when he's asked by the high priest, "Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed?" and he says, at least in Mark, "I am," he hasn't blasphemed. So that when Caiaphas the high priest rips his garments and said, "You've heard that blasphemy," the fact is that's just as much a trumped up false charge as all the other charges laid against Jesus. But the text forces questions back on us. What counts as blasphemy? If we say, and I don't want to say it in case it counts, like gosh, but you know what I'm referring to, gosh darn. But we use harsher terms. Have we blasphemed? I've heard the name Jesus Christ taken as an insult, I can't even say it. But when we invoke the name of God because we've stubbed our toe or because we're upset at something, does that count as blasphemy? And if it does, what do we do to stop it? The passers-by, the bystanders, torment Jesus, and they rail at him with various accusations. "You who would destroy this temple and build it up in 3 days, where's your power now? Take yourself down from the cross. Prove to us that you're the King of the Jews. Prove to us that you're the Messiah." But those statements alert us that Jesus and the temple have a somewhat fraught relationship. On the one hand, Jesus refers to the temple as the house of my Father. We find him in the temple in the Gospel of Luke, listening to the teachers and engaging with them, and it's all fine. We also see him coming into the temple and engaging in some sort of violent act. But did he do it at the beginning of Holy Week? That's Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Or did he do it a couple of years earlier? It shows up in John in chapter 2, right after the wedding at Cana. Clearly, there's some difficulty there. But did Jesus reject the temple? Absolutely not. And how do we know that? And how do we know it is a very good question to ask, by the way, because Bible scholars sometimes make stuff up. How do we know this? Because Jesus' followers continued to worship in the temple. And we know that from the book of Acts. And we know that from Paul, who talks about the benefits of the Jews, one of which, the Greek is latreia, it means worship. And what it technically means is temple worship. Jesus may be upset with the high priests. Jesus may be upset with people coming to the temple as if to say, "I've done my religious duty, but I haven't repented in my heart." It's like going to church on Sunday morning, putting a $20 bill in the collection plate, and sinning the rest of the week. Jesus and the temple had a fraught relationship. The details remain unclear, but the details help us ask the right questions regarding religious institutions, regarding worship, regarding community values. Biblical scholars love to give technical terms to material in the Gospels. So we have a technical term, the Cry of Dereliction. We hear it in Aramaic, or a mixture of Aramaic and Hebrew, in the Gospels of Mark and Matthew. It's the first line of Psalm 22, my God, why have you forsaken me? Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. When Jesus cites this cry of dereliction, it's the perfect statement to make under the circumstances. Psalm 22 is what we would call, again a technical term, the psalm of a lament of an individual, and there are many of them. And these psalms begin with a sense of desertion by God. Where are you? You're my God, you're the God of my people. I'm suffering, where are you? And then they go on in quite conventional form. My enemies are surrounding me, rescue me. You've rescued my people before, at the Exodus, at the Red Sea, where are you now? And then it turns to, if you do rescue me, because you have in the past, I will sing your praises at the gates. I will sing your praises to the world. Jesus' cry of dereliction makes sense because he's dying and he doesn't want to die. As he says in Gethsemane, let this cup pass from me. My God, why have you forsaken me? I feel abandoned by everybody. People are standing here mocking me, which is part of Psalm 22. People are wagging their heads and teasing me. Psalm 22. People are casting lots for my garments. Psalm 22. And then Jesus on the cross citing the psalm, and all readers who know the psalm know that first verse, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, that's not the end of the story. The end of the story is universal acclamation for the power of God, the God who rescues. Luke leaves out the Aramaic. Luke typically doesn't like Aramaic. And John leaves out the statement entirely, but includes other passages from Psalm 22. Why? Because in the Gospel of John, Jesus is not deserted, does not feel deserted. In the Gospel of John, Jesus and God the Father are so intimately related that it would be impossible for Jesus to feel himself deserted. In Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the psalm makes perfect sense given how they understand Jesus. In John, the lack of the psalm makes sense. And what does that tell us? That the Gospels have different understandings of Jesus, as should we all, because we understand him differently, depending upon who we are, our own location, whether we are suffering or joyful, indeed, what passages we read.
Remember that, so you've got a lot of languages crossing here. So the common language of the people would have been Aramaic. The religious language is Hebrew. The Roman language is Latin, but the most common language is Greek. So when Mark is writing, he's writing to a Greek audience, but also one that, he's sort of introducing these phrases to them. Whereas Luke is writing to a very Gentile audience, so the Aramaic doesn't really make sense for him to write. I mean, that would be a language that you wouldn't know. So it's a matter of their location and where they go. And if you look at this chart, just a reminder, this is what we call the four source theory of how the Gospels interact with one another. Most scholars believe Mark was written first. Why? Because it's the shortest. And also because there are parts of Matthew and Luke that are taken almost verbatim from Mark, but not the same passages. So it seems as though Matthew and Luke used Mark as a source. Now, Matthew and Luke also have material that's not in Mark that they share, namely the teachings of Jesus, Sermon on the Mount, Sermon on the Plain, parables. You don't have a lot of that in Mark. You have some, but not a lot, which leads some scholars to believe that there's a lost document out there called Q, which was sort of a compilation of the sayings, sermons of Jesus. And then Matthew and Luke have their own sources. And then you have John, which is a radically different, wholly other kind of approach to the gospel story. Very theological, built around several significant stories and encounters that Jesus has with people. I think we did a sermon series on this last year or a couple years ago on encounters with Jesus. We took some of those stories from Mark and looked through them. I'm sure you all remember. But it's very different from that standpoint. So when you're looking at these, then you have to think, okay, what's the setting? What's the time period? What are the audiences for each of these? So Matthew clearly has more of a Jewish audience because of the way that he approaches things. His opening chapters read more like the story of Moses. Jesus' birth is very much like Moses' birth. There's an evil king that wants to kill the babies and all of that. You don't get any of that in Luke. That's why we read Luke at Christmas, because no babies get killed. That's Epiphany, so we push that off till later. But Luke has shepherds and angels, and it starts with who? Caesar Augustus. So he's writing to more of a Gentile Roman audience. Mark probably sort of a mixed audience, but Mark's Greek is very choppy, and it moves very quickly. I call it the Reader's Digest version. That John is very much embedded into a much later sort of rounded theological understanding. So you get different views, and that's why you have to sort of read each one within its own context before you synthesize them together. That's kind of important because, and then that's why I said to you earlier, I think it's important for you to read each of these texts and say, okay, what's different, what's similar, because they're trying to tell their stories from a different angle to a different audience for a different purpose. And this happens all the time around historical events. We shouldn't be surprised that these are different and they have some different material and different emphases and things like that. I have 50 books on my shelf on the Battle of Gettysburg. Okay, 50, and growing. Okay, but I can read each of those accounts and know they're written at different time periods, different authors. They emphasize different things, and they're designed for different kinds of audiences. Coddington is for the nerds. Trudeau is for the general person who wants to go to the battlefield and sort of kind of wants to know the story. Two very different approaches. That's the way the Gospels work too. But we have this man, Simon of Cyrene, named in the Synoptic Gospels. I find him to be a fascinating figure in this whole process because he is the one who's drafted to be there. Cyrene is North Africa, so Libya, modern-day Libya. And he is probably in town for the Passover. A Jew travels into Jerusalem for the Passover, happens to be in the crowd, and she mentioned that law of Lexangeria, which is you're forced to carry the burden for 1 milion. Milion in Roman parlance is 1,000 paces. So he is called upon to do that. In Romans, Paul says that, right, you remember Simon, father of Alexander and Rufus. So there's this sense that, Simon is known to this community and his sons are known to the community. But in the book, in the Leader's Guide, she asks the question, is Simon complicit in Jesus' death? Or is he a victim? How do you understand Simon's role as a witness to the cross? What do you think? Is he a contributor or a victim or something else? Right, because what happens if you refuse? Oh, guess what? You're going to join him. Yeah. Probably not without some application of, yeah. And this is a world where you don't want to call attention to yourself. This is a world where you will not be out there with a protest sign. Because one, it's an honor and shame culture, so conformity to the crowd is important. But also, the Romans don't like anyone who stands out, and that raises the ire. So nowhere to be found. Unless you're in John's gospel, then John is there, at the foot of the cross and sees everything. But yeah. That's right. So, and does he? I mean, for all Simon knows, he could have just come to town. He doesn't have any idea who this is. I mean, we always think, oh, if he'd only known. Well, he didn't know. He didn't know who Jesus was. There were two other guys dragging crosses as well. So it's hard to say. It's sort of like soldiers. Are soldiers complicit in, the acts of their nation that sends them to war? That's an important moral question. One we can't answer tonight. We're not going to try, but it's an important question. So we think about those things. But I always think about Simon of Cyrene because he is the cross bearer. In fact, if you go on the Via Dolorosa in Jerusalem, there's a little chapel on the way for Simon of Cyrene. It marks the traditional spot where Simon of Cyrene picks up the cross, and the title on the door in Latin is Simon the Cross Bearer. So you imagine thinking about this afterwards, and Jesus says, "Pick up your cross and follow me." Well, the people he said that to are not doing so. Simon of Cyrene is. So, is it an act of mercy? That's another good way of looking at it. So, bystanders and blasphemy. So, if you look at Mark chapter 15, verses 27 to 32, and with him they crucified two bandits, one on his right and one on his left. Those who passed by derided him, shaking their heads and saying, "Aha, you would destroy the temple and build it in 3 days. Save yourself and come down from this cross." In the same way, the chief priests, along with the scribes, were also mocking him among themselves and saying, "He saved others, he cannot save himself. Let the Messiah, the King of Israel, come down from the cross now, so that we may see and believe." Those who were crucified with him also taunted him. So it raises the question, when have you seen someone being publicly shamed by a crowd? How did you respond? Yeah, there's a groupthink that goes along with that. And in some ways, the question really is, was the crowd the same people? Because this is a marvelous preaching point that probably isn't accurate. So if you hear it preached, you need to raise your hackles a little bit. But the same people who were in the crowd on Palm Sunday are the same people who are in the crowd, at the crucifixion. Maybe. But the crowd of people on Palm Sunday are likely more Jesus followers and disciples, people who now, if you've cheered Jesus as the conquering hero coming in from the east while the Romans are coming in from the west, when that goes bad, you don't want to be seen anywhere, right? So you have this crowd that's now around the cross. You have those who are weeping and mourning, but probably more curious bystanders, or those who, it's like, the crucifixion was like going to a hanging in the Old West. It was like a thing. It was like, hey, there's a crucifixion today. Let's go out and take a look. And part of the expectation was, you were going to show no mercy on these people because they're crucified naked. They're left out there sometimes for days. I mean, the fact that Jesus and these others die within an afternoon is unusual. Usually you'd be on that cross for hours or even days. So this was a spectacle, but it's interesting, the mix of people that you find at the foot of the cross. And she brings this up that there at the foot of the cross are the chief priests and the scribes. Now, what do we know about dead bodies and Judaism? It makes you unclean. So why would I be anywhere around this? Why would I be anywhere around this if I'm a chief priest or a scribe or a Pharisee or a Sadducee or anyone like that? Why would I risk being defiled by the riffraff? Because, all of those kinds of things. To put your stamp of approval on it, I think absolutely right. And also to make sure that it happens. Yeah. Yeah. Or to prove the point. See, he's not all that. Yeah, I think that, again, they're trying to make sure that that's happening and that it's done before the Sabbath. And, but also, I think they're invested because who are the chief priests appointed by? They're appointed by the Romans. They're part of the priestly family, but they're appointed by the Romans. They serve at the behest of Rome. Caiaphas, appointed by the Romans. So, in effect, they're acting also as kind of agents of the state. Not directly, but somewhat indirectly. Because Pilate knows he can't run sideways of these people or he's going to have a problem. Pilate is the ultimate pragmatist. Right? He doesn't really care if Jesus is innocent or guilty. He just wants everything to go away. He washes his hands of it, And so the chief priests, the scribes, the lawyers for the religious law, in what ways are these people culpable? We heard about the trumped up charges and about, the charge of blasphemy, the charge of all those things. Jesus is not cursing God. He's not doing any of that. So what are they actually accusing him of? When they say, are you the Christ? I am, and you will see the Son of Man. It's quoting from Daniel there. In that particular text in Daniel, it's not necessarily equated that the Son of Man in Daniel is the Son of God. We make that connection because of our familiarity with the Gospels and Jesus' own self-referential way of dealing, but we don't catch all the nuance in that. You have these chief priests and scribes who are making sure the deed is done, and so they're really the ones who are kind of the catalyst behind all of it. And so they're not swinging the hammer, but they put it in the Romans' hands. Culpable? Yeah. Let's talk about this blasphemy thing for a minute. For Mark, abuse of Jesus is abuse of God, as it should be. I mean, we're Trinitarian. Mark is Trinitarian. He understands that. Jesus is accused of his response to the high priest's questions, are you the Messiah? I am. Here again, it picks up perhaps a reference to Exodus 3:14. What does God tell Moses his name is? I am. In John's Gospel, it's structured around these stories, but also around the I am statements in Mark. I've talked to you about this before, but there are ways of saying I am that don't involve emphasis. So if you're in Spanish and I want to say I have, I can just say tengo, right? I don't have to say yo tengo. I don't have to use the pronoun. But in the Greek, in John, it uses the pronoun and the verb, which is emphasis. I am the Good Shepherd. I am the bread of life. Very clearly connecting back to this image from Exodus. But then from Daniel 7, that indication of the vindication of the Son of Man. Now here's what we know. They're accusing him of blasphemy, but we know he is who he says he is. So he's speaking the truth. The fact that they don't know it's the truth doesn't make it not the truth. So It's the advantage we get from the perspective of the reader to know that Jesus is actually speaking the truth. But he doesn't simply say, yes, I'm the Messiah, I'm the second person of the Trinity, God and I are the same person. They make that inference. They run down that track. As well they should. Because that's what he intends. But, again, how does this response? Is Jesus speaking blasphemy? No, I think he's speaking the truth. So how does the response of the passerby and the chief priests and the scribes actually blaspheme in Mark 15:25 to 32? Can we recognize blasphemy when we hear it? Good question. What are some of the things that they say? Those who passed by derided him. You who would destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself and come down from the cross. In the same way, the chief priests, along with the scribes, were also mocking him among themselves and saying, he saved others, he cannot save himself. Let the Messiah, the King of Israel, come down from the cross now, that we may see and believe. Now, in the other Gospels, Synoptic Gospels, what do they say? You know? If you are the Son of God. Matthew and Luke, if you are the Son of God, come down from that cross. Where have you heard that before? Temptation narratives. In fact, it's interesting in Luke's Gospel, in the temptation narrative, when Satan departs, it says, he left him until a more opportune time. When was that opportune time? Hear through the voice of these people at the foot of the cross, saying the very same thing. So are they blaspheming? Well, they didn't expect it to end like this. Even though Jesus told them plainly. Mark's Gospel tells them 3 times how this is going to end. And they go, yeah, whatever. Which one of us is the greatest? Yeah. Okay, Jesus, right. Fine. There's another great metaphor about crosses, blah, blah, blah. Okay, whatever. But, this was the real deal. He was actually talking about this. You know? So, yeah, I mean, how many of these people, I wonder, how many of these people, after the death, resurrection of Jesus, and the day of Pentecost, because what does Peter say on the day of Pentecost? This Jesus, whom you crucified. 3,000 were added to their number that day. How many of the people in the crowd were here at the foot of the cross? We have no idea, but it's an interesting question. Well, at the time of the Passover, there would be as many as 200,000 people in the city. Normally a population, I think it's around 40 to 50,000. So it would swell up at the time of the Passover. So you got all these people. That's why Simon of Cyrene is there. You got all these people in town for the Passover. So, and then when does Pentecost happen? It happens during the Feast of Pentecost, where all these other people are in town. Another big crowd. That's where we get that Acts chapter 2, and every year the lay readers, right? The people who have to read Acts chapter 2 as a lay reader on Pentecost Sunday are always like, Phrygians and Pamphylians and, all those other people who were there. I got all the lay readers here. They know. It's like, who drew the straw that day? My guidance to the lay readers is always, it doesn't really matter how you pronounce it. There's like 3 people in the congregation who know how it probably should be pronounced from the Greek. I said, but when you stand up there, whatever you say it with confidence, and that's all that matters. Yeah, when he says, that should never happen to you. Yeah. And what does Jesus say to him? Get behind me, Satan. So, here again, to Tyler's point, he doesn't know what he doesn't know. He thinks he knows. He's confident. These people think they know. They're confident. So what does it say to us? To say, how often are we certain, and yet we don't know what we don't know? I preached on the Pharisees this week, and here are people who don't know what they don't know because they're so focused on their own righteousness that they don't know that when Jesus says, "I've come to call not the righteous but sinners," and so the Pharisees might go, "Oh, well, he's not really talking to us," except for the fact that the scriptures say there is none righteous, no, not one. Hello. What's that about? So there's a bunch of things like that go with it. I'm watching the clock here. So Psalm 22, the Cry of Dereliction. She brought that up. Jesus quotes from the first line of the psalm. I was in seminary till I realized that was Psalm 22 he was quoting. No idea. I always thought Jesus feels like God has left him. Well, it certainly feel like that. But he's actually quoting from the Psalms, which tells you how steeped he was in the Psalms. I mean, the Psalms are quoted more than any other Old Testament book. And this image from Psalm 22 then permeates the crucifixion story. When you read Psalm 22, and I encourage you to do that, perhaps tonight before you go to bed, go read Psalm 22 and look at the parallels. Now, clearly the gospel writers have these things in mind as well because they're referring back to them. But it's interesting how the historical events align with so many of the things in the psalm. But where does Psalm 22 end? Not with the pit, but rather with vindication and glory. And so Jesus is, in effect, praying Psalm 22. If you quote the first line of the psalm, it's like quoting the whole thing. So when he's quoting Psalm 22, he's basically saying, I'm putting myself in your hands. I'm in this situation. This is the depths. But I'm trusting in my God. The psalmist calls for God's salvation, which goes beyond physical rescue. But notice that the bystanders, when they talk about salvation, what are they talking about? Pull the nails out, jump down here, and all will be well. It's the same temptation as jumping off the pinnacle of the temple. Could Jesus have done that? Could he, why not? My father would send 10 legions of angels, that would have been impressive. That would have gotten people's attention. But, to Tim's point earlier, that's not how this was going to play out, right? This was the movement. This had to happen. Jesus knew it had to happen. He prays in the garden to ask it for it to go away. He didn't want it to happen. But he goes by faith in the midst of this. So the bystanders have a limited view of salvation. Thus their mocking of Jesus seems to constitute blasphemy. But once again, to Tyler's point, they don't know what they don't know. If you're the Son of God, come down from this cross. By the way, he is the Son of God, but he's not coming down from the cross because there's a bigger agenda here. So what are some ways people blaspheme Jesus today? How does Jesus' own response instruct us on how to deal with blasphemy? Right, so even, like alignment with, if we claim the name of Christ, we can't use it in casual ways because that name means something. We pray in the name of Jesus. What is the, one of the first commandments of the 10 Commandments? Don't use the name of the Lord your God in vain. In other words, it's not something to be thrown around. That we want to use that name in a way of praying for rather than cursing, things like that. So I guess the invitation is to hold our opinions lightly about the intentions of others, but also pay attention to our own speech, and the ways that we think about things, and who we mock, because we are all prone to do that. Is that helpful? Because think about it, when you mock another person, you're also mocking someone made in the image of God. So work with that for a while. Let that percolate for a while. I'm talking to myself here too, so we have to think about that because we do a lot of that in this culture, an awful lot of it. Do we see others? This goes back to we see someone who's been piled on or whatever. Even if we disagree with them necessarily, do we need to join the crowd piling on? It's an important question. We got just a few minutes left, so I want to talk about the temple here for a minute, because this is a big part of what precipitates a lot of things that happen around the crucifixion. In the Synoptic Gospels, synoptic means seen together, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. The Jesus turning over the tables in the temple happens at the beginning of Holy Week. So it happens either on Sunday or it happens on Monday. In John, it happens like in chapter 2, where she said, this happened 2 years earlier or whatever. I've read some commentaries that say things like, well, this was the second time Jesus turned over the tables in the temple. No. Because that's not something you would do twice and get away with it. You're not going to do that twice. So again, the gospel writers are putting them in different places for different reasons. But you have this temple, what does the temple represent? It represents the dwelling place of God on earth. Doesn't mean that God isn't everywhere, but this is the location. The Ark of the Covenant from Solomon, where the Israelites brought the Ark into Jerusalem, set up the temple. Solomon builds a temple. That temple is destroyed by the Babylonians, 586 BC. It's rebuilt. It's kind of sad. Everybody says it's kind of sad. Herod the Great comes to power, he's not Jewish really, he's Idumean. He's kind of Jewish, but he's really not ethnically Jewish. So he wants to legitimize his reign. So he decides to take fabulous wealth and rebuild the temple as a way of legitimizing himself as Israel's king. And so you have this massive temple complex, but Ark of the Covenant's not there. There's a lot of stuff that's missing, and yet still the sacrificial system is going on. So this is the second temple, and it's a place of worship. But one of the things that she doesn't bring out, that I agree more with N.T. Wright on, is that the temple was also the symbol of the nation. So if you want to take the Capitol building, the White House, the Washington Monument, Mount Rushmore, all those things, and wrap them up into one thing, that's what the temple was for Israel. Not just a religious place of worship. I mean, when the Jewish rebels in 66 were rebelling against Rome, they minted their own coins. What did they put on their coins? They put a picture of the temple. So Jesus comes into this temple, turns over the tables of the money changers. Let me tell you what all four gospel writers are clear about. This is not just a hissy fit Jesus is throwing over people selling stuff in church. This is an acted parable of judgment, because what does Jesus do in effect by overturning the tables of the money changers? He stops the sacrificial system. He stops it temporarily. He is pronouncing the fact that this commerce is going on. Remember, too, that the temple also held the treasury of Judea. People paid their temple tax. It was the national bank. It was the religious center. It was really the center of civic life. All those things were bound up in the temple. So Jesus comes in and pronounces judgment on the temple. Now, she's correct in that the apostles are still worshiping in the temple because that judgment hasn't happened yet, but it's coming. 70 AD. It's coming. So why does Jesus pronounce this judgment? it's not a judgment against worship, but it's a judgment against their hypocrisy. Remember who's in charge? Chief priests, appointed by the Romans. And nationalism. Because again, this becomes the rallying point. If the Gospels are written close thereabouts to the destruction of the temple, this is in the back of their mind. The Romans under Titus destroy the city and the temple after they besiege it. Jesus says in John 2, destroy this temple and I will raise it again in 3 days. What's he talking about? The temple of his body. And it's important from that perspective, if you take John and Revelation and put them side by side, if the same writer wrote both, which a lot of scholars believe is the case, they certainly are stylistically very similar. What happens at the end of Revelation is that the New Jerusalem comes down, but notice it has no temple. Who is the temple? Jesus. Lord God Almighty and the Lamb are the temple because they're dwelling with God's people. So when Jesus shows up on the scene, he is God present. The temple no longer is necessary. What about the sacrificial system, which stops after the temple is destroyed? Do you need the sacrificial system? Why? Jesus is the Lamb. So, there's some Christian sort of dispensational theology that says, you got to rebuild the temple again before Jesus comes back. I think that's a misreading of the text. You might disagree, that's fine. But I think that's a significant misreading of the text. Because the point is, Jesus is saying, this temple is going to be overthrown. It really wasn't the authentic temple anyway. And so Jesus now embodies the function of the temple. His presence, worship, sacrifice, atonement, all bound up in Jesus. New Testament, you have the Jews and Gentiles together as part of the family of God. There's no longer a wall separating them. There's no longer a court of the Gentiles and a court of the Jews. So you have God's presence, while it always seen as moving beyond the temple, is now wherever Jesus is. What does he say? Wherever 2 or 3 are gathered, there am I in the midst of them. So Jesus reorients the entire spiritual geography of Israel. So the point here is that, they're mocking him from the cross. You said you'd tear down the temple in 3 days. Well, he never said he'd tear down the temple. He said, you tear down this temple. It's going to be torn down. It'll be rebuilt. He says to his disciples in Mark, as they come out of the temple, he says, the disciples are going, look at these stones. And some of us have been there. Those stones at the base of the retaining wall, some of them 80 tons, cut perfectly square, beveled edges, smooth, beautiful. Look at these stones. I mean, these are Galilean hicks. They're in the big city. They're like people walking around looking at the buildings in New York City. Teacher, look at these stones. He says, I'll tell you, not one's going to be left on top of another. All will be thrown down. What? How's that possible? And it's going to happen because the Romans are going to come. And for Jesus, the wrath of God equals the wrath of Rome. God passes judgment on this corrupt system. And so it's interesting to think about what we invest our symbolism in. Right in the Capitol. Whoa, time out. Now you're getting into, some poking at symbolism. The flag. Think about the amount of energy we invest in flag placement, flag use, all that kind of stuff. I'm not saying we shouldn't do that. I like to stand for the national anthem as much as anybody else, but sometimes we're over-invested. Biggest controversy we ever had in my tenure here in the church was over flag placement in the sanctuary. I bet you could not all tell me right now where it is. Some of you can because you were part of that. But does it belong there? That's a story for another night. But the amount of energy put around that says which symbol is more important. Okay? Think about it. What are we invested in? Are we invested in nation first and Jesus second? Or do we just simply mold the two together, which is often the case? I think Jesus' judgment on the temple challenges that symbolism. That these are important symbols. I'm not saying they're not important. But what is Jesus trying to point people to? Something much larger. Yeah. A kingdom that is accessed, how? By picking up one's cross. So, lastly, I know I'm just running over just a minute. You got to go to choir, go ahead. You're fine. But the inscription over the cross, go ahead, Susan, you could go, but she's like, I'm not ready. Oh, okay, great. So I got 8 minutes. Okay. So, the inscription over the cross, the Titulus, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. Why does Pilate have this put up there? Yeah, because yeah, I mean, he says basically, this is the kind of king that you're going to get. His intention is to offend the Jewish leaders. Because what are they actually charging Jesus with? Why does Jesus get crucified? Yeah, it's sedition, but Pilate knows that's false. Because he knows Herod Antipas is down the street during the festival. Normally lives in Galilee, but now down for the festival. He knows that's the king of the Jews. Nobody's really king of the Jews. Pilate is governor. Tiberius is the emperor. Who cares about these people? We're just humoring you to keep you in line. That's how the Romans look at it. So that's a charge of sedition. And he writes it in Hebrew, Greek, and Latin. So anybody walking down the street can read it. Because they normally nailed the charge over the cross. So, here again is irony. They don't know what they don't know. Is Jesus King of the Jews? That's half right. Yeah. So again, they don't know what they don't know. Isn't it interesting that when Jesus is on the cross, and all of this has happened, and he looks at the crowd, and he prays to God, and he says, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they don't know. Now, the flip side of that is, we do know. And how does it make us different? That's the question I'm going to leave you with as we go out tonight. Okay? So, let's pray, and then we'll let you all go out into the night and get home before the snow starts flying, hopefully. Hopefully it holds off for another hour, so yes. Lord God, we ask your hand on us as we go forth tonight, as we ponder these important questions. We ask your grace and mercy, traveling mercies home for all those who are driving. And we look forward to gathering again next week in the name of Christ. Amen. Thank you all.